When the pain will be over. You know what?
I've been in prison for 23 years and have 2 lives without and a life with.
For at least 17 years.
It makes us the worst version of ourselves.
18 years after her murder.
Give us our next.
And I'm not sure what he was in there for, but it was misdemeanors, I think.
On only a few days later realized it really never ends. That it had done nothing at the table when families gather to ease his pain. He witnessed the execution.
A 19-year-old committed a crime that would have consequences he never saw coming. Michael Tisius, in his 40s now, faces the capital punishment for a lethal slaying he took part in at 19. Let's dive in. The tragic crime. In early June of 2000, Michael A. Tisius and Roy Vance were cellmates at the Randolph County Jail in Huntsville, Missouri. Tisius' sentence lasted 30 days and Vance told Tisius he would be in jail for some 50 years. As such, Tisius and Vance discussed various schemes where Tisius would return to jail to help Vance escape. In one of those plans, Tisius was to return to the jail with a firearm, force the guards into a cell, and give the gun to Vance, who would then take charge and release all of the inmates. The Randolph County Jail was a 2-story brick building that had been converted from a house. The front door of the jail was kept locked, and the officers could remotely open the door when visitors rang a doorbell.
Michael Tisius was convicted of killing 2 jailers back in the year 2000.
The cost of managing those sentenced to death
led him to be very, very, very vulnerable.
Inside the front door was a small foyer, and to the right behind a counter was the dispatch area where the officers were stationed. A hall led from the dispatch area to the jail cells in the rear of the building. Tisius was released on June 13, 2000. Shortly after his release, Tisius contacted Vance's girlfriend, Tracy Bullington, who said that she wanted to go through with the escape plan. 4 days later, Bullington drove from Macon to Columbia with a woman named Heather Douglas to pick up Tisius and drive him back to Macon. Tisius and Bullington stayed at Douglas's home for 4 or 5 days. During the ride to Columbia, Douglas heard the two discuss various ways of breaking Vance out of jail, including the idea of locking the jailers in a cell. They told Douglas they were joking. Douglas testified that over the days to follow, she heard Tisius and Bullington say that they were on a mission, but they would not elaborate. Tisius and Bullington also described taking cigarettes to Vance at the jail and of having gotten information from a stupid deputy. At other times, they would stop talking when Douglas entered the room. Douglas also testified that Tisius and Bullington kept a stereo, clothing, and camping gear in Bullington's car, and that she also saw a pistol in Bullington's car.
As nearly 40 countries reject the latest UN resolution against the practice.
In that, in American history, not going all the way back to colonial days, there have obviously been more than that in terms of military executions.
Since 1977, when the death penalty was reinstated here.
For some, it's been nearly 30 years.
The execution of a person, even one guilty of a terrible crime.
Beginning June 17, 2000 and continuing over several days, Tisius and Bullington visited the jail several times. At or around 1:30 a.m. or 2 a.m. one of those mornings, they were admitted in the front door and delivered a pack of cigarettes to an on-duty officer, requesting that it be given to Vance. A day or two later, Tisius and Bullington returned to the jail with a pair of socks for Vance and asked questions about his upcoming court date. Bullington testified that each delivery signified to Vance certain facts, such as that Tisius had made it to town or that the jailbreak would not occur the night of the delivery. During some of those visits, Tisius kept a .22 caliber pistol that Bullington had taken from her parents' home in front of his pants. Tisius had tried to acquire a bigger gun than the one Bullington took. On the night of one of their visits, one officer testified that the Tisius and Bullington were acting real funny, nervous, and erratic, such that he wrote a police report about the visit.
Around establishing what's called intravenous access.
At 6 p.m., the order was given to proceed with a lawful execution.
We were actually in the same county jail, but we were in the small 4 at the time.
We can act in a way that is not in accord with societal standards, and that's what happened here.
And our Mercedes McKay is joining us live with more on this crime and the other executions already carried out by the state of Missouri. Good morning, Mercedes.
Tisius tested the gun by firing it outside of Bullington's car window while the two were driving on country roads on June 21, 2000. Later that evening, Tisius and Bullington drove around listening to a song with the refrain, "Mo Mudda," more slang, as they prepared to get Vance out of jail. Tisius rewound the cassette and played the Mo Mudda song over and over. Tisius told Bullington it was getting about time and that he was going to go in and just start shooting and that he had to do what he had to do. Tisius also said he would go in with a blaze of glory. At 12:15 a.m. on June 22, Tisius and Bullington returned to the Randolph County Jail, rang the doorbell, and were admitted. Tisius again carried the pistol in his pants. Tisius and Bullington told the officers they were delivering cigarettes to Vance. The two officers present were Leon Egley and Jason Acton. Tisius made small talk with one of the officers for about 10 minutes, discussing what Tisius was planning to do with his life and how Tisius was doing. Bullington testified that at that point, she was about to tell Tisius she was ready to leave but froze as she noticed Tisius had the gun drawn beside his leg.
Is extraordinarily high for the department.
Wish for a state, I long for a state where our leaders could have empathy.
So why is capital punishment still favored in many places? This is Inside Story.
And what we've seen in industrial accidents, and you take what we know.
Causes and 14 by suicide while on death row.
In their cases, with the promise of an execution to make them feel better.
Tisius then raised his arm with the pistol drawn and, from a distance of 2 to 4 feet, shot Acton in the forehead above his left eye, slaying him instantly. Egley began to approach Tisius, and about 10 seconds after he slayed Acton, Tisius shot Egley 1 or more times from a distance of 4 or 5 feet, until Egley fell to the ground. Both officers were unarmed.
I mean, the Catholic Church teaches that even in the presence of heinous crimes,
front the narrative that
the state killed 42-year-old Michael Tisius by lethal injection for a federal judge is delaying the execution of a Randolph County man.
I'm the brains behind it. It was my idea.
In other states, he would not be on death row, but in Missouri, he is.
Tisius then took some keys from the dispatch area and went to Vance's cell. Tisius could not open the cell, so he returned to the dispatch area to search for more keys. While Tisius was in the dispatch area, Egley grabbed Bullington's legs from where he was lying on the floor, and Tisius shot him several more times at a distance of 2 or 3 feet. Egley suffered 5 gunshot wounds, 3 to the forehead, a graze wound to the right cheek, and a wound to the upper right shoulder.
Who has, in effect, nothing to lose, really.
Similar to so many people, abused and neglected his life.
Needs to be defended.
The US Constitution, however, strictly bans what it describes as cruel and unusual punishment.
Unusual. It's been used in less than 1% of executions.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it.
Not long afterwards, police found Egley gasping for air and heard a gurgling sound. He was surrounded by a pool of blood. Egley perished shortly afterwards. Tisius and Bullington fled in her automobile. Tisius threw the keys from the dispatch area out of the car window on the way out of town. Bullington threw the pistol from the car window while crossing a bridge on Highway 36. After the two had passed through St. Joseph and crossed the Kansas state line, Bullington's car broke down. Later that day, the two were apprehended by the police, and the keys and gun were recovered.
the person who committed the crimes retains a fundamental dignity and is made in the image of God.
We've had 13 executions.
It's despicable that two dedicated public servants.
My suggestions and that kind of stuff.
After having waived his Miranda rights, Tisius gave oral and written confessions to the slayings. Tisius' theory at trial was that he was guilty, at most, of second-degree slaying, because although he admits that he shot and slayed the two officers, he argues that he did so without deliberation. Punishment, or slaughter. The U.S. Supreme Court has denied a request to stay the fatal punishment of Michael Tisius, scheduled to perish by lethal injection soon at a prison in Missouri. Tisius's two co-defendants, Roy Vance and Tracy Bullington, are serving life sentences. In the application to stay the punishment submitted to the Supreme Court, Tisius's legal team argued he should be spared because of his age at the time of the crime. In 2005, the court ruled that fatally punishing youth under 18 violated the 8th Amendment's provision, prohibiting cruel and unusual punishment. The justices cite scientific research showing juveniles lack the maturity of adults and are more vulnerable to negative influences. 18 years after the decision, Tisius's attorneys argue that more recent evidence shows that the brains of those in late adolescence between 18 and 21 are not fully developed.
Not life! Not justice!
Michael Tysius was convicted for killing 2 Randolph County deputies while
were murdered in a failed attempt to help another criminal evade the law.
But the Justice Department has now allowed more methods, including firing squad and electrocution.
And with the people that made the terrible choices who were probably victims.
And I was in there with him for 2 weeks before I got released to go to a rehab center.
Given recent advances in neuroscience and society's evolved view of the moral culpability of late adolescents, that logic now supports the categorical exemption of late adolescents from the capital penalty, the application said. They go on to cite laws and standards that prohibit most late adolescents from drinking, consuming marijuana, renting a car. In response, the Missouri Attorney General's office said Tysius has failed to show evidence about brain maturity that is substantially different than research available in 2005.
The death penalty is applied in a way
attempting to free someone from jail in 2000.
Rights groups accused the Trump administration of rushing to execute 5 inmates before the president's term ends in January.
And distracts us from compassion and mercy and true justice.
And is capable of redemption, therefore.
They also said no state, quote, with an active fatal penalty scheme prohibits the punishment of 18 to 20-year-olds. Several prominent groups and individuals have voiced opposition to the fatal punishment, including the American Bar Association, the Missouri State Public Defender's Office, and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They cited a variety of factors, including Tysius' age, history of being neglected, and poor legal representation.
that is not consistent.
Should the death penalty be abolished worldwide? The US allows for more methods for executing inmates.
If you take what we know about the human body and electricity, you take what we know.
These families have had to put their healing process on hold.
Cold-blooded convicted killer.
In a letter dated June 2nd, the European Union's delegation to the U.S. wrote to Governor Mike Parson saying it opposes the capital penalty in all cases, but that Tysius' case was particularly concerning. The letter said multiple neurological experts determined that Mr. Tysius' serious impairments allowed him to be quote-unquote groomed by Mr. Roy Vance while serving a 30-day sentence in jail for a misdemeanor. Vance said he was behind a plan to get Tysius in Bullington to help him escape from jail. He described Tysius as, quote, a kid in a grown man's body, and I knew I could manipulate him into what I wanted him to do. A former warden where Tysius was imprisoned and Archbishop Christopher Pierre, a personal representative of Pope Francis, have also called on Parson to commute Tysius' sentence to life without parole. Like the overwhelming majority of those on the row in the U.S., Tysius faced profound neglect, violence, and poverty as a child. He was born in 1981 to young parents who made clear that they did not want him and had little ability or interest in taking care of him. According to Tysius' clemency petition, he was deprived of affection, never taught basic hygiene, and beaten frequently by his brother, sometimes to the point of unconsciousness, his lawyers wrote in his clemency petition. His self-esteem was shattered, and he often wrote himself notes documenting his self-loathing. I'm weird, I'm stupid, I'm a weirdo, I'm ugly, I'm a moron, nobody likes me, I'm ugly, I'm a dork, a geekazoid, I'm a slob, I'm a geek, nobody loves me, I'm not worth a cent. Tysius wrote while he was in the 4th grade according to the clemency petition.
That makes brutes of us all.
A man facing execution.
The point is that this has always been a method.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine. Come on, Reverend Clark.
Tysius' first fatal sentence was vacated because evidence was presented inaccurately during the penalty phase of his trial. For the second trial, he was appointed 2 private lawyers contracted by the Missouri State Public Defender, who were each paid a flat fee of $10,000. The ABA has long cautioned against flat fee arrangements in capital cases because of the unacceptable risk that counsel will limit the amount of time invested in the representation in order to maximize the return on the fixed fee. Enix Ross, the ABA president, wrote in her letter urging the Missouri government to grant clemency.
Well, you have somebody with life imprisonment.
Leading up to that in their lives as well.
I came today because I think the death penalty should be abolished.
For decades, the US has used lethal injections to execute those convicted of certain crimes.
During that time, 38 have died from natural.
There never can really be closure.
Both of them describe a very terrifying experience.
The Missouri State Public Defender's Office no longer contracts capital penalty cases to lawyers for flat fees. The office's director, Mary Fox, wrote in a separate letter in support of Tisius's clemency request. Quote, "The use of flat fees disincentivizes the attorneys from performing the essential mitigation investigation, trial preparation, and trial presentation work necessary to effectively represent a person charged with a capital offense," Fox wrote. In Tisius's case, she continued, "Counsel failed to adequately meet and consult with Tisius and failed to present mitigation evidence related to his mental health diagnoses and adolescent brain development.
Instead of pushing us to address inequalities and exploitative and oppressive systems,
both with the victims,
from observational data, from what we've seen from other electrocutions,
complains about the prodding and poking of a small IV line.
The affidavits from jurors included in Michael Tisius's clemency petition demonstrate that if resentencing counsel had provided the resentencing jurors with the available mitigation evidence, which had been presented at a prior hearing in which Michael Tisius did not have flat fee counsel and which resulted in the new sentencing hearing, that a life without probation or parole sentence could have been returned, Fox wrote.
What we're saying to the people of Missouri is that killing people you're mad at.
The second time I met up with him was in the same county jail, except that we were in the big, what they call the Big Six.
Pentobarbital was administered. 6:10 p.m. Michael Tisius was pronounced dead.
There was an issue.
Is an offense against God, an offense against the dignity of the person.
I also came because I think the right to protest.
There have been 143 other civilian firing squad executions.
Governor Hutchinson says that we need to carry out the execution so the victims' families can have a closure.
Further mental health concerns. Over the past 20 years, the Supreme Court has banned the harshest punishments, including the capital penalty and mandatory life without parole sentences, for people who commit crimes before they are 18 years old. These decisions are backed by neurological research showing that an individual's brain continues developing into their mid-20s. As a result, children and young adults are often impulsive, easily manipulated by others, and struggle to weigh long-term consequences.
it appeals to our worst instincts for violence and blood.
That jurisdictions have authorized.
Is the firing squad unusual? Yes, it's.
We are here to confirm.
Tisius's final meal was 2 bacon cheeseburgers.
Moreover, mental illnesses and cognitive issues that impact decision-making abilities often are not diagnosed and treated until adulthood. Multiple medical experts hired by Tisius's current legal team have found that his severely traumatic childhood appears to have negatively impacted his neurological development. Neuropsychiatrist George Woods wrote the following after evaluating him in 2018, quote, "Neuropsychological testing corroborates the frontal temporal striatal deficits that characterize Mr. Tisius's cognitive deficits. Like a toxic stream running through relatively healthy land, Mr. Tisius's frontal temporal striatal poisons much of his healthy cognitive functioning, rendering it vulnerable to impaired functioning, especially in new, novel, and stressful circumstances."
From the animal slaughter industry, it is an absolute.
Justice, not evil. And poverty, quickly the rules have been changed.
The 2000 murders of Leon Egley and Jason Acton.
I first met him about a year before this.
And can figure out a way that we could move forward without more killing.
Another damning point for Tisius is the fact that experiencing trauma at an early age can disrupt your emotional growth. People might not outgrow childlike actions like impulsivity and temper. Instead, they may remain as coping methods, causing problems in relationships, work, life, and even a person's sense of self. Throughout his childhood, Tisius was neglected by his parents and beaten by his older brother, which is just about enough trauma for anyone. Quote, "The boys lived on Pepsi, cold hot dogs, and chips," his clemency application read. He often appeared hungry and dirty, reeking of urine and in need of medical attention for scabies or ringworm. His parents had a volatile relationship and divorced when he was 2 years old.
And it also needs to be extended.
Certainty that a certain percentage of these people.
Everything is okay.
At 6:01 p.m., the lethal injection.
This is manifest injustice. We all understand that in youth.
His mom was involved in body work and was emotionally harmful. His dad came in and out of his life. His brother attacked him on a daily basis, throwing baseballs and bottles at him. He failed 6th grade and had a profoundly low sense of self-worth. Tisius also grew up near a Superfund site, and later in life his attorneys had his lead levels tested and found that they were 7 times the average amount. Elevated lead exposure can cause brain damage and behavioral problems. When he was 13, he went to live with his father and his stepmom.
Capital punishment is a brutal system.
Are going to die painful deaths.
Curly fries, regular fries, and a chocolate shake.
Because killing this man isn't going to help anybody.
I know how hard it is to wake up every day not knowing.
She showed care towards him, but his dad abruptly sent him back to live with his mom after 2 months. He told his older brother his dad didn't want me anymore, and in another note to himself, he wrote, "I hate myself. Everybody hates me. I wish I would perish." Tisius had a difficult life from the get-go, setting him up for disappointment. When he came under the influence of an older man like Vance, he was willing to do anything to prove his worth, including committing a slaying. Surely he had a lot to overcome, but a psychiatrist who has evaluated Tisius in 2003, 2012, and 2022 confirmed in his last report that Tisius had indeed matured and grown with age. Tisius, quote, has learned self-control, has empathy for others, shows empathy for the men he slayed, is no longer impulsive, and is seeking to make the best life he can in his current situation, psychiatrist Stephen Peterson wrote in his last report.
That leave people marginalized and unsupported.
Because there will always be that empty chair.
My name is Roy Vance. We're at ERDCC.
Is an appropriate response.
A federal judge ordered last week that Tisius' punishment be halted to investigate evidence that one of the jurors from his trial cannot read English, a state requirement for jury service. An appeals court overruled that decision, and the matter is now pending before the Supreme Court, which is expected to rule soon. Tisius has spent his past 23 years of incarceration continuing to make art. He's painted murals throughout the prison and donated his art to an auction to raise money for a domestic violence center. In a world where I felt I had no control, art has given me that control and has allowed me to connect to my emotions, as well as other individuals, Tisius said in a conversation excerpted in his clemency petition. It allows me to express myself when my words can't. As his punishment approaches, a team of attorneys is asking Missouri Governor Mike Parson to grant Tisius clemency in light of the harm and neglect he endured as a child, jurors who have changed their minds, and the role of a co-conspirator. Tisius is scheduled to perish by lethal injection on June 6. This week, lawyers submitted a 56-page clemency application to the governor. The document is sprinkled with drawings, sunflowers, portraits of dogs, and the Virgin Mary, created by Tisius, who said art has been an emotionally and mentally therapeutic outlet throughout his years at Potosi Correctional Center. It also includes statements from jurors and an archbishop who support commuting his sentence to life without parole.
The death penalty is about to go.
When the pain will be over, you know what?
I've been in prison for 23 years and have 2 lives without and a life with.
For at least 17 years.
Tisius' legal team also said he has expressed genuine remorse. Not a day has gone by that he has not regretted his actions, they wrote to Parson. His dedication to personal growth reflects in his artwork and his faith in God. He strives to be redeemed in the best manner he can, and in doing so, demonstrates the difference age makes in development. As his punishment date approached, Tisius rushed to finish a painting with a motivational phrase on the wall of a rehabilitation unit for those in long-term segregation. He wanted to finish it before he was slain. The ethical debate. There is an ethical debate surrounding the capital punishment of a person who is 19 years old, considering the fact that they do not have a fully developed brain, making it a highly contentious and emotionally charged issue.
It makes us the worst version of ourselves.
18 years after her murder.
Give us our next.
And I'm not sure what he was in there for, but it was misdemeanors, I think.
It raises fundamental questions about the nature of justice, the maturity of young adults, and the impact of brain development on culpability and punishment. The human brain undergoes significant development throughout childhood and adolescence, with some areas continuing to develop into early adulthood. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for higher-order cognitive functions such as decision-making, impulse control, and moral reasoning, is one region that undergoes continued maturation during this period.
On only a few days later realized it really never ends, that it had done nothing at the table when families gather to ease his pain. He witnessed the execution.
This ongoing development suggests that individuals in their late teens and early 20s may not have the same level of cognitive and emotional maturity as fully mature adults. Opponents of fatally punishing kids who are under the age of 18 argue that brain development should be considered a crucial factor in determining an individual's culpability for their actions. They argue that the immaturity of the brain can lead to poor judgment, impulsive behavior, and an inability to fully understand the consequences of one's actions.
It's despicable that two dedicated public servants, having run a small county jail, I know firsthand the hard work and selflessness displayed by those who worked there, were murdered in a failed attempt to help another criminal evade the law.
Punishing individuals in this age group, they contend, fails to take into account the potential for rehabilitation and the capacity for growth and change that comes with further brain development. Proponents of fatally punishing young adults who have committed heinous crimes argue that chronological age alone should not be the sole criterion for determining the appropriateness of the fatal penalty. They contend that individuals who commit serious crimes should be held accountable for their actions, regardless of their brain development stage. They emphasize the importance of personal responsibility and the need for society to exact punishment commensurate with the severity of the crime committed. The ethical debate also touches on broader issues related to human rights and the concept of cruel and unusual punishment.
And it's illegal now to execute anyone whose crime was committed at 18 or impulse control and such things until about 25. We can just spread the word to everyone that are under, but he's 19. The brain does not fully develop that these things are happening. Also, he was 19 years old.
Many countries and international human rights organizations have abolished the capital punishment of juveniles or individuals under the age of 18, recognizing the unique vulnerability and potential for rehabilitation among young offenders. However, the debate continues regarding whether this age limit should be extended to encompass individuals in their late teens and early 20s, considering the ongoing brain development during this period. In the end, scientific research has shown that the human brain undergoes significant changes throughout adolescence and into early adulthood. While the brain continues to develop well into the 20s, it is important to note that the concept of a fully developed brain is not a clear-cut or universally agreed-upon milestone. Different areas of the brain mature at different rates, and the exact age at which the brain reaches full maturity can vary among individuals. Who is to say Tisius's brain was mature enough at the time of the crime to truly comprehend the impact of his actions? The ethical implications of fatally punishing individuals who are 19 years old or a bit older and still have developing brains are complex and multifaceted. Balancing the principles of justice, proportionality, and the potential for rehabilitation requires careful consideration of scientific understanding, moral reasoning, and societal values. As our understanding of brain development and its influence on behavior deepens, ongoing debates and discussions are essential for shaping legal and ethical frameworks that navigate these complex issues. Tisius's eventual punishment is one that could define the future of how other people in similar predicaments are going to be punished, making it even more important for justice to be served.
What we're saying to the people of Missouri is that killing people you're mad at.
The second time I met up with him was in the same county jail, except that we were in the big, what they call the Big Six.
Pentobarbital was administered 6:10 p.m. Michael Tisius was pronounced dead.
There was an issue.
Is an offense against God, an offense against the dignity of the person.
I also came because I think the right to protest.
There have been 143 other civilian firing squad executions.
Governor Hutchinson says that we need to carry out the execution so the victims' families can have a closure.
A conflicted jury. The slayings were so brazen, so brutal, they stunned the people of Missouri. When a jury was asked to sentence Tisius for his crimes, its members spent several hours deliberating in July 2010 before rendering a decision, the capital punishment. The state is still fighting in court to slay Tisius as punishment for slaying the two jail guards when he was 19 years old. He's scheduled to be punished by lethal injection soon, although his request for a stay is still pending before the Supreme Court. Now, with Tisius's punishment set for the 6th of June 2023, that jury is facing scrutiny that could cast doubt on the proceedings. In an unusual step, 6 jurors, including 2 alternates, have said in sworn affidavits included in a clemency petition that they would be supportive or would not object if the governor of Missouri stepped in to commute the sentence to life imprisonment rather than a fatal one. It is rare, experts said, to see so many jurors formally taking such a stand in a capital penalty case. Another juror, when contacted recently by legal representatives from Tisius, told them that he could not read in English, a requirement in Missouri courts for jury service. A federal judge ordered last week that the punishment be halted while the claim of illiteracy was investigated, but on Friday, an appeals court overruled that decision. In a 56-page petition sent to Governor Mike Parson of Missouri, jurors recounted in statements obtained from Tisius's defense team why they have changed their thinking since the sentencing 13 years ago. They were still convinced of his guilt, the jurors said, and believed he should never be released from prison. But they spoke of new details they learned from Tisius's legal team and what they remembered from the trial. The harrowing background of Tisius's childhood, which included harm and neglect, of his mental impairments, and of his good behavior in prison since his conviction. "I believe that people can change and should get second chances," one juror said in an affidavit. "At this time, based on what I have learned since the trial, I would not object if Tisius's sentence were reduced to life without parole," another juror said. "There is no legal recourse for jurors who have had a change of heart about a fatal sentence," said Wandalyn Taylor, a visiting professor at Gonzaga University School of Law who teaches on the capital penalty, though lawyers often find examples of it in interviews with jurors during the appeals process. In interviews with different news outlets, 2 jurors said they would have been haunted by their experience. One woman who served as an alternate said she has suffered from anxiety, sleeplessness, and guilt. If she had been allowed to vote, she said she would not have chosen a fatal sentence. Another juror, Jason Smith of Republic, Montana, said that in the 13 years since the sentencing, his views on Tisius, who was now 42, have shifted. During deliberations, Mr. Smith said he felt it was a crucial fact that Tisius had slayed more than one person. Tisius had an opportunity to stop before shooting the second jail employee. Mr. Smith recalls reasoning, making the capital penalty a just punishment. But now he said he knows, based on what he was recently told by Tisius's legal team, that doctors who have examined him concluded that he had mental deficiencies that could have impaired his decision-making. And Mr. Smith has learned about medical research showing that the frontal lobe of the brain is not fully developed in the teenage years. Mr. Smith, 49, said he still supports the capital penalty in certain cases and feels that Tisius should spend the rest of his life in prison. But he no longer believes Tisius deserves to perish. He says, "I feel angry and remorseful. I feel that I wronged Michael." Public support for the capital penalty in the United States has waned for decades, and Missouri is one of the only 4 states to have carried out a fatal punishment in 2023, along with Florida, Oklahoma, and Texas, according to the Penalty Information Center. In 2023, Missouri fatally punished Amber McLaughlin, a transgender woman who had been found guilty of slaying her ex-girlfriend, and Leonard Taylor, convicted in 2008 of a quadruple slaughter. 2 more fatal punishments, including Tisius's, are scheduled in Missouri this year. When a jury in 2010 was asked to determine Tisius's sentence, they were told of the botched escape attempt that resulted in the slayings of Jason Acton and Leon Egley. Tisius had been trying to free an inmate, Roy Vance, who had previously been his cellmate. Vance, who was serving a life sentence in prison for his role in the incidents, has since said that he had manipulated Tisius to carry out the escape plan. The other person who was trying to free Mr. Vance was Mr. Vance's girlfriend, Tracy Bullington. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for her role in the slayings.
It's despicable that 2 dedicated public servants, having run a small county jail, I know firsthand the hard work and selflessness displayed by those who worked there, were murdered in a failed attempt to help another criminal evade the law.
Instead of pushing us to address inequalities and exploitative and oppressive systems,
both with the victims,
from observational data, from what we've seen from other electrocutions,
complains about the prodding and poking of a small IV line.
who has, in effect, nothing to lose, really.
Similar to so many people, abused and neglected his life.
Needs to be defended.
The US Constitution, however, strictly bans what it describes as cruel and unusual punishment.
Unusual. It's been used in less than 1% of executions.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it.
During the resentencing hearing in 2010, convened after the court found evidence of prosecutorial misconduct in a first hearing, jurors were told of Tisius's difficult life, including harm at the hands of his older brother. One juror, Ginny Young, said in 2010 that as soon as the group left the courtroom, several jurors began to cry. Some jurors who were contacted by Tisius's legal team affirmed their original decision that Tisius should be sentenced to his demise, or declined to sign affidavits, said Keith O'Connor, a lawyer for Tisius. An alternate juror interviewed recalled riding in a van with other jurors after leaving the courthouse. The juror, who declined to be named because she said she had concern about privacy, remembered weeping, thinking that the jury had made a mistake. The Missouri Supreme Court denied an appeal from Tisius and in March scheduled his punishment. Since then, opponents of the capital penalty have intensified their efforts to persuade Mr. Parson, the Republican governor, to commute the sentence. Archbishop Christopher Pierre, the Pope's representative to the United States, appealed to Mr. Parson for clemency. The American Bar Association argued in a letter that capital punishment should be prohibited in cases of people who have committed crimes while 21 years old or younger. Mary Fox, director of the Missouri State Public Defender System, asked Mr. Parson to commute the sentence, saying that Tisius was not effectively represented during the trial. In a statement from prison, Tisius said he still believed there was a chance that Mr. Parson would commute his sentence. "My only hope is that the governor makes his decision based on me, my remorse, my life, and my rehabilitation over the last 23 years, he said. I feel like I've changed. I hope he can see that in me, too.
As nearly 40 countries reject the latest UN resolution against the practice.
In that, in American history, not going all the way back to colonial days, there have obviously been more than that in terms of military executions.
Since 1977, when the death penalty was reinstated here.
For some, it's been nearly 30 years.
The execution of a person, even one guilty of a terrible crime.
Public support for the capital penalty in the United States has waned for decades, and Missouri is one of the only 4 states to have carried out a fatal punishment in 2023, along with Florida, Oklahoma, and Texas, according to the Penalty Information Center. In 2023, Missouri fatally punished Amber McLaughlin, a transgender woman who had been found guilty of slaying her ex-girlfriend, and Leonard Taylor, convicted in 2008 of a quadruple slaughter. 2 more fatal punishments, including Tisius's, are scheduled in Missouri this year. When a jury in 2010 was asked to determine Tisius's sentence, they were told of the botched escape attempt that resulted in the slayings of Jason Acton and Leon Egley. The families of victims. For Linda Arena, the sister of Jason Acton, one of the slain jail employees, the fatal sentence brought relief. The years since have been a long wait for what she sees as justice. Miss Arena, 73, remembers her brother as a boy, affectionate and funny, with a deep love of the outdoors. As an adult, she said, he took a job at the jail because he hoped it would be a stepping stone to a position as a park ranger. In the final days before Tisius's scheduled punishment, the clemency petition, and statements from several jurors in support of a commutation of his sentence, has left Miss Arena confused and angry. It kind of makes me sad because they listened to all the evidence, she said. They knew that this guy planned to do that. They brought a gun on purpose. He slayed Jason and he slayed Leon. All the years that her brother has been gone, Miss Arena has thought of Tisius spending his days in prison.
And only a few days later realized it really never ends. That it had done nothing at the table when families gather to ease his pain. He witnessed the execution.
Why was he free to be alive, she has asked, eating meals, having conversations with other people, when Jason was not? Miss Arena is determined to drive to Bon Thierre, where the fatal punishment is scheduled to take place. She plans to bring a photo of Jason and hold it close, but she's not sure how the punishment will leave her feeling or whether she will be able to look Tisius in the eye. So in the end, the question remains, how to punish a criminal like Michael Tisius? If he is spared a fatal punishment, The families of the victims will feel as if they are cheated out of retribution for what happened to their loved ones, while if Tisius ethically doesn't deserve to pay with his life for a crime he committed when he was 19, as a neglected and emotionally immature youth, another life will be lost. That's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time at the next one.